What if the man who sent for a quiet, obedient wife got something else entirely? A woman who could outshoot his foreman, price cattle better than his banker, and still look him dead in the eye without flinching once? What if the woman who agreed to marry a stranger did it not because she had no options, but because she had a plan? Stick around, because this is the story of Clara Sutton and Elias Marsh, and nothing about it went the way either of them expected. It is 1883. The dust out west has a personality. It doesn't just blow, it presses against you like a judgment. And Elias Marsh understood that better than most men in Weston County, Wyoming Territory. He had built something out here. 4,700 acres of dry grass and hard sky, a cattle operation that turned heads at the stockyards in Cheyenne, and a reputation for being the kind of man who finished what he started. What he hadn't finished, what gnawed at him like an unhealed sore, was the matter of a wife. He was 41 years old. His hands were the color of saddle leather. His cook, old Pete, had been threatening to quit for 3 years. The bunkhouse had no woman's order in it. Calves were born and sometimes died because there was nobody with the patience to sit through a difficult night and coax life out of something fragile. Elias didn't have that patience. He had scale. He had ambition. What he didn't have was someone to balance him out. So he did what practical men did in 1883 Wyoming Territory. He wrote to a matrimonial correspondence agency in St. Louis. His letter was exactly 6 lines long. He listed what he needed. He did not ask what the woman needed. That tells you everything about where Elias Marsh was starting from. Now, before we go any further, drop a comment below. Would you have answered that letter? 6 lines, no promises. A man you'd never met, somewhere out in the dust. Tell me what you'd have done. The agency sent him 3 replies. He threw away 2 without finishing them. The 3rd one he read twice, then a 3rd time. Then he folded it and put it in his front pocket and kept it there for 4 days before writing back. Her name was Clara Sutton. She was 34 years old, from a town called Harlow, Illinois. She had worked a dry goods store after her father's death, managed the books, supplied the credit ledger, and kept the whole thing running for 8 years until her brother came back from Kansas City and decided it was his store now. She didn't argue. She started over. And when she answered Elias Marsh's advertisement, she did it the way she did everything, with complete clarity. Her letter was not warm. It was not coy. It was not the letter of a woman selling herself. It was the letter of a woman making a business proposal. She outlined what she could offer: organizational skill, physical endurance, competence with livestock based on a childhood on her uncle's farm in Indiana, and what she described as a working tolerance for difficult men. She noted she did not require romance, but she did require respect. She noted she could cook, but preferred not to be defined by it. She asked 3 questions about the ranch that no woman had ever asked Elias before: the calving season schedule, the current ratio of hay stock to head count, and whether his water rights were secured against neighboring claims. Elias Marsh stared at those 3 questions for a long time. Then he wrote back and said she should come. Here is the thing about that. She already knew she was going to go. She had made up her mind before she sealed the envelope. The questions weren't doubt. They were due diligence. Clara Sutton was not a romantic, but she was thorough. She arrived on a Tuesday in late April. The stage dropped her at the crossroads 3 miles from the ranch because the road past that point was too badly rutted after the spring melt. She walked it, alone, with a trunk she dragged by one end through the mud and a rifle slung over her shoulder that she had carried since she was 22. Elias had sent his foreman, a man named Tuck Redfield, to collect her with a wagon. Tuck waited at the crossroads for 40 minutes before riding back to the ranch to tell Elias the woman hadn't come off the stage. He arrived to find Elias standing on the porch, watching a figure come up the road through the golden afternoon light, dragging a trunk in the mud and not asking for anybody's help. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "She came." They shook hands at the gate. Not an embrace, not a smile of welcome, a handshake, like two people closing a deal. And in a way, they were. The wedding was 3 days later. The preacher came from Cartwright, 15 miles south. Old Pete made a roast. The foreman stood in as witness. It took 8 minutes. And when it was done, Clara Marsh, she had taken his name the same businesslike way she'd done everything else, asked Elias for a full accounting of the ranch finances by end of week. He was so startled he said yes before he thought about it. Now here's where this story starts to turn. Elias Marsh had a problem he hadn't told the agency about. He hadn't told anyone, really, except his banker in Cheyenne, a man named Hollis Greer, who had been patient, but was running out of it. The ranch carried debt. A bad year in 1881, a drought that killed 200 head and forced him to sell the south pasture, had left him short on collateral. He had borrowed against his water rights to keep the operation going. And now, Hollis Greer wanted to renegotiate those terms, or take the water. Without the water, the ranch was dust, literally. Elias had told himself he'd figure it out. He'd been telling himself that for 14 months. What he hadn't counted on, what none of his mental calculations had included, was a wife who read ledgers the way other people read novels.
Something is missing.
Clara found the debt on day 4. She didn't make a scene. She came to him in the evening while he was checking the fence line reports with Tuck, and she said, quietly, without drama, "I read the accounts. We need to talk about the water rights." Tuck made himself scarce. Elias waited for judgment. He had braced himself for it his whole life, and here it was. A woman who had walked into a bad situation and now had every right to be furious. She wasn't furious. She was thinking. She sat down at the table. She had a piece of paper. She had done the math already. She outlined 3 options. Restructure the note with Greer by offering a share of the spring cattle run. Approach a competing lender in Denver she had corresponded with through the dry goods business. Or sell the North herd now at current prices before the summer, heat dropped weights, and sell at a premium she had already calculated. Elias looked at that paper for a long time. He was not a man who liked being outpaced. He was not a man who handled surprise well, but he was, underneath all of it, a man who wanted the ranch to survive. He said, "How did you calculate the premium on the North herd?" She said, "I asked old Pete which ones were in best condition, and I walked the field this morning." He said,
I did that.
"You walked the whole North field this morning?" She said, "I woke up early, and right there, in that kitchen, over a piece of paper with numbers on it,
These numbers
something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet. Something older and more durable than romance. Mutual recognition. The understanding that you are looking at someone who is genuinely capable. Before we go on, this is the part of the story where things get complicated. And if you want to see how it ends, make sure you're subscribed, because we are barely halfway through what Clara Sutton did to that ranch, and to the man who thought he was getting a quiet wife. Elias took Clara's second option. He wrote to the Denver lender. Clara drafted the letter. It was, by every account Elias could measure, better than anything he would have written himself. The terms they negotiated over the following 6 weeks were favorable enough that Hollis Greer in Cheyenne was cut out of the picture entirely. The water rights were secured. The collateral was restructured around the cattle operation, which was, Clara had been right, performing better than the ledger suggested once you accounted for a deferred invoice from the Cheyenne stockyard that hadn't been posted correctly. That last detail she found on a Sunday afternoon. She didn't say anything until Monday morning. She just put the corrected figure in front of Elias with breakfast. He looked at it. He said, "This is $340 different." She said, "Yes, it is." He asked who made the error. She said, "Does it matter? It's corrected now." He thought about that. He nodded. He ate his breakfast. Meanwhile, Tuck Redfield was having the worst spring of his professional life. Tuck had been foreman for 7 years. He ran the hands. He set the work schedules. He decided which calves got extra attention and which fence sections got repaired first. He was, in his own estimation, the second most important person on the Marsh ranch. And for 7 years, that had been a comfortable and unchallenged position. Clara didn't challenge it either. She didn't argue with Tuck. She didn't undermine him in front of the hands. She asked him questions. Specific, operational, deeply inconvenient questions. Why was the south water trough being filled by hand instead of extending the pipe run by 40 feet and gravity feeding it from the upper tank? Why were 3 of the hands doing fence repairs in the far west section when the east fence near the road, which customers and buyers traveled on, was in worse condition? Why had the calving schedule not been adjusted to account for the 2 weeks of late frost that everyone knew was coming? She asked these things privately, politely. And Tuck, who was not stupid, understood that she was not asking for her own satisfaction. She was asking because things were being done wrong, and she was giving him the chance to fix them before it became a problem. He didn't know what to do with that. In 7 years, no one had offered him that particular kind of respect. The other hands watched. Men notice things they don't always talk about. They noticed that Tuck came back from conversations with Clara looking like he'd been handed a test he hadn't studied for. They noticed the pipe extension got built in 3 days and saved them 2 hours of work every morning. They noticed that when the late frost came exactly when Clara had said it would, every calf that needed shelter had it, because she had made old Pete help her reorganize the barn 3 weeks before. They started coming to her with small things. A horse with a gate that seemed off. A question about whether the supply order was right. Whether the river level downstream was something to worry about. She always knew. Or she found out. Or she said clearly that she didn't know, and they'd better check with someone who did. Which, the hands were starting to understand, was its own kind of competence. Elias watched all of this happening on his ranch, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. He felt relief. Deep, almost shameful relief. Like a man who had been holding his breath for years and had finally, quietly, been told he could exhale. He also felt, and this was the part he had more trouble with, something that was pulling him toward her. Not toward the efficiency or the numbers, toward her, the way she laughed at old Pete's terrible jokes because they were terrible, not despite it. The way she sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the sky turn colors without needing to fill the silence. The way she had never once, not in 2 months, made him feel smaller for the trouble the ranch was in. He didn't know what to do with any of that. He was 41 years old. He had built his entire interior life around being alone and being strong and needing nothing. What Clara Sutton had walked into, dragging a trunk through the mud, was not just a failing ranch. It was a failing man. And she had not flinched. He came to her one evening in June. The light was low and golden, the way Wyoming light gets when the day has decided to be generous before it ends. She was sitting with the ranch accounts, updating the ledger with a steady hand. He sat down across from her. He said, and it cost him, she could see it in his jaw, "I want you to know that I understand what you've done here, for the ranch, and I want you to know that I'm—" He stopped. He wasn't built for this. He tried again. "I'm glad you came." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I had already decided to come before I sealed the letter. I knew what I was walking into. You were honest in what you needed. That counted for something." He said, "The 6 lines." She said, "The 6 lines told me you were practical. practical I can work with," he said. "And now?" She looked at him for a moment longer. She closed the ledger. She said, "Now I think there might be more to work with than I expected." Outside, the horses moved in the pasture. The late stars were coming up. Somewhere down the road, in the part of the territory that hadn't yet decided whether to become a state or stay wild, a coyote tested the night with its voice and got no answer back. What happened between Elias Marsh and Clara Sutton over the following months was not the story either of them had agreed to. It was better, harder in places, and better. They argued about the fall cattle drive route with a fierceness that left both of them silent for a full day. She was right. He knew it the moment they were back in the field, and the route she'd chosen saved them a full day's drive and held the weights better at the stockyard. He told her she was right. She told him she knew. They had to laugh. It was the first time they'd laughed together. She got into a disagreement with a land buyer from Omaha who came in October trying to pick up the south pasture at a figure that was insulting. Elias had been prepared to take it. The old instinct. The one that said, take what you can get before it disappears. 4. Clara sat across the table from the buyer in the ranch house and went through his valuation figure by figure and showed him, politely and without blinking, exactly where each number was wrong. The buyer left without buying anything. He also left looking like a man who had sat down to play poker and not realized until too late that the other person had seen every card. Elias asked her later if she'd been nervous. She said yes. He asked how she'd hidden it. She said, "I focused on the numbers. Numbers don't care who's nervous. The water rights stayed secured. The North herd sold at the premium she'd calculated. Old Pete stopped threatening to quit. Tuck Redfield, by December, was voluntarily bringing operational questions to Clara before taking them to Elias. Not to go around Elias, but because he'd learned that she would think things through and send him back to Elias with a better question than the one he'd arrived with. And on a cold, clear night in January of 1884, when the first real blizzard of the year came down out of the mountains and the temperature dropped so fast it cracked the water trough in the near pasture, Clara and Elias worked through the night side by side, moving cattle, reinforcing shelter, keeping the youngest animals alive through sheer physical stubbornness. By dawn, they were both standing in the barn, exhausted, covered in hay and cold and effort. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and there was nothing either of them needed to say. She had not ridden in to be a wife in the old sense. She had not ridden in to be managed, or arranged, or completed. She had ridden in because she had looked at what was being offered, the difficulty, the distance, the complete absence of guarantee, and decided it was a problem worth solving with her own hands. And if somewhere inside that calculation there had been the possibility of something real, well, Clara Sutton had always been thorough. What do you think? Would you have been brave enough to take that ride? Drop it in the comments. And if you made it this far, you clearly have good taste in stories. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we have more of these coming, and you do not want to miss what's next. The Wyoming Territory, in those years, was full of people who had come from somewhere smaller and tried to become something larger. Most of them didn't make it. The ones who did were not always the strongest, or the fastest, or the ones with the most land. Sometimes they were just the ones who looked at a hard situation and asked the right 3 questions before anyone else thought to ask any. A water schedule, a hay-to-head ratio, a water rights claim. She had known what she was riding into. She had ridden in anyway. This story, like all the stories we tell here, is an artistic reconstruction created with the help of artificial intelligence, developed as an independent creative work intended to entertain and offer something worth thinking about. The characters, events, settings, and situations you've seen are fictional and the result of creative imagination. For historical context on the American West, the period of Western settlement, and the lives of women in the frontier era, we encourage you to explore academic sources, archival records, and the excellent work of historians who have dedicated their careers to telling those real stories with the accuracy they deserve.